The next speaker is the organizer of the event today. He is the executive director of the High Roads for Human Rights, former mayor of Salt Lake City, and all-around rabble-rouser. Please welcome Rocky Anderson.
Four times in recent years, George Bush has come to Salt Lake City. 4 times we have been out expressing our heartfelt concern as patriots about what's happening in our nation, and we're not going to let up. We and the entire world know that George Bush is a war criminal. We know because of his authorization and condoning of torture that he not only stooped to a moral level unknown among presidents in our nation's history, but he blatantly violated several treaties, including the Geneva Conventions, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention Against Torture, all of which were ratified by the U.S. Senate, and all of which are still binding on the United States. Under our Constitution, those treaties, along with the Constitution and laws passed by Congress, are the supreme law of the land, and under our constitutional democracy, no one is above the law. That is the message we need to keep sending. But it doesn't stop with our sacred treaty obligations. Bush, Cheney, and others also, without any question, violated several laws passed by Congress, including the War Crimes Act of 1996 and the Anti-Torture Statute. That makes George W. Bush a war criminal. Until he is brought to justice for his outrages, the stench of his presidency will hang over our great country. It is up to us to remove that stench, to find and follow the moral compass that our Constitution, our founders, our treaties, and our domestic laws help to create. It's time to get back to that fundamental moral compass. British law, as well as the law of every other developed nation, has absolutely outlawed torture as being, in the words of the Lords of Appeal in the United Kingdom, totally repugnant to the fundamental principles of English law and repugnant to reason, justice, and humanity. The Lords of Appeal noted as recently as 2005 that, and they're basically saying exactly what retired Brigadier General David Irvine just said, that in rejecting the use of torture, the common law was moved by the cruelty of the practice, by the inherent unreliability of confessions or evidence so procured, and by the belief that it degraded all those who lent themselves to the practice. It has degraded our nation, and we will not allow that degradation anymore. Consider how radically things have changed, and I especially want young people to understand it hasn't always been this way. When I think of how young people must view our country, people who have grown up seeing our country, going around the world kidnapping, disappearing, and torturing people, please realize that until 10 years ago, our nation's leaders have consistent and absolutely prohibited torture. That doesn't mean that it may not have happened, but as a matter of official policy and as a matter of our nation's laws, it has always been absolutely prohibited until these past 10 years. Recall the words of George Washington, who, after British soldiers were captured in the Battle of Princeton, he ordered the Revolutionary soldiers, he said, treat them with humanity and let them have no reasons to complain of our copying the brutal example of the British Army in their treatment of our unfortunate brethren. So for all those who point to the actions of those who have attacked our country and who have perpetrated the worst kinds of abuses as terrorists, let us never justify our actions by saying, but they do it, so let us do it also. During the Civil War, the Union Army abided by the Lieber Code, prohibiting the intentional infliction of any suffering on captured soldiers. General Eisenhower guaranteed exemplary treatment to German POWs during World War II, and General Douglas MacArthur ordered compliance with the Geneva Convention during the Korean War, although the United States had not yet signed that treaty. Our nation did ratify the Geneva Conventions, which prohibit torture, and we also ratified the Convention Against Torture, which makes it clear that there are never any exceptions to the prohibitions against torture. U.S. servicemen have been prosecuted for participating in torture. How is it that we prosecuted our own service people, but the President of the United States could order torture and come here and sign books at Costco bragging about him saying damn right when he was asked, should we go forward with torture? No useful information was gathered through torture during the Bush years. Don't let anybody ever mislead you into believing that we got any good information from torture. In fact, just the opposite occurred. You can ask Colin Powell about this because he went to the United Nations saying, we have evidence that Saddam Hussein has been training Al-Qaeda in the use of weapons of mass destruction, and it turned out that information came from one source, and it came through the use of torture, because that person, as he said later on, I would have told them anything they wanted to hear. So what did that misinformation get us? It got Colin Powell going to the United Nations with that misinformation, leading to the tragic deaths of tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers and hundreds of thousands of deaths of innocent Iraqis. That's what torture brought to our country and the rest of the world. Our nation's proud tradition of prohibiting torture has helped protect our own servicemen and servicewomen. Now President Bush, Vice President Cheney, and others have put our soldiers at far greater risk because of our embrace of torture. And they have reduced our nation morally and in terms of our reliability among nations that expect signatories to treaties to live up to their word. It's time that we as a nation live up to our word under these sacred treaties prohibiting torture. The persistent stench of the Bush presidency is certainly exacerbated by the complacency and hence the complicity of the American people who failed to rise up against the cruelty, the immorality, and the blatant illegality of torture. When I was mayor of Salt Lake City, there were several homicide cases that had gone unsolved for many years. We called them cold cases. We set up a cold case team to investigate the cases and to do everything possible to attain at least a modicum of justice. The crimes of the Bush administration, including the engagement in an illegal war of aggression in violation of the Kellogg-Briand Pact and in blatant violation of the United Nations Charter, the denial of due process for American citizens, the kidnapping, disappearance, and torture of people around the world, including people like Khalid al-Masri and Maher Arar, who had no connection whatsoever to terrorism, and the felonious warrantless wiretapping of American citizens' communications. Those are the cold crimes of the century. In fact, they are the cold crimes of our nation's history. There is a major difference, however. The cold crimes in Salt Lake City went unsolved mostly because of a lack of evidence. The evidence of the Bush administration crimes is absolutely overwhelming. if we are to restore the rule of